finally seen the true darkness that dwells beneath the surface of this world. The evil that neither science nor reason can explain. Yet I have also seen its beauty, and those willing to give all to protect it.
Welcome to Truth and Shadow, your guide through the supernatural. I am your host, BT, and this is a Shadow Short. Let's navigate the unknown on this brief journey into the depths of mystery. They say the dead have no business with the living. That once the breath leaves the body, what is left is a husk. Silent, still, harmless. That's the official line anyway. It's tidy, sanitary, comforting. But the Norse didn't believe that. Neither did the ancient Hebrews, and I'm not sure I do either. Somewhere out past the fjords of Norway, beyond the howling of wolves and the whistle of pine trees bent by bitter wind, lies a ship. Not a ship built by hands, but by death. Its hull is made not of timber, but of the fingernails and toenails of corpses. Its sails are stretched from skin, its ropes, sinew. The Vikings called it Naglfar, the nail ship. They believed it would set sail at the end of days, bearing giants, monsters, and the dead toward the final battle of Ragnarok. Now that sounds like myth, a poetic flourish, a warrior's tale by firelight. But what if it's more than myth? What if it's memory? Because almost every ancient culture, from the Hebrews to the Greeks to the Norse, there's a shared lingering fear that the dead can return, that they can haunt, corrupt, infect, that they can be used, possessed, reanimated by things that were never human to begin with. Jesus cast them out into pigs. Saul summoned one from the dust. And every exorcist I've ever talked to says the same thing. When the Spirit speaks, it often speaks in voices not its own. Maybe Naglfar isn't just a story about death. Maybe it's a story about doors, about what happens when the veil between worlds thins and something slithers through the cracks, something with the smell of the grave and the voice of an angel, but there's no light in their eyes. Today on Truth and Shadow, in this Shadow Short, we're going to dig up the borrowed graves of the North. We speak with the dead. We trace the black line from Odin's necromancer to Saul's Seeresses, to the late night knock on your bedroom door that no one else hears. This is a story about the end, not just their end, but ours. Because if Naglfar sets sail at the fall of the world, you have to wonder who's been building it and what rides aboard. They say it's the fingernails that build it. That when a man dies, his soul might fly to Valhalla or sink to hell, but his fingernails, they stay behind. If they're not trimmed before burial, they become planks. They become pitch and tar. They become part of a ship that should never float. This is Naglfar, the nail ship of Norse mythology. It's not the only vessel that ferries souls to the afterlife, but it's the one you don't want to be on. The Draugrs, the dragon-proud warships of Viking lore, were often burned with the dead aboard, their ashes offered to the sea or sky. But Naglfar isn't a chariot of glory, it's a dreadnought of doom. And according to the Prose Edda, it lies in the underworld, moored and waiting. When the world begins to end, it will break free and sail the poisoned sea, delivering its passengers, the giants, the monsters and corpses, to the final battle at Ragnarok. But let's slow down, because this isn't just the dramatic climax of a Viking blockbuster. It's something older and more primal. The imagery of a ship of the dead shows up in multiple traditions. The Egyptian boat of Ra, sailing through the underworld. Think of the Greek ferry across the river Styx. I mean, you can even think about Ezekiel's wheel, if you're bold enough. But Naglfar is different. Most mythological vessels carry the dead to judgment or rebirth. This one carries them to war. And that makes me ask, who's building it? Well, the Norse believed that human remains, especially the fingernails and the hair, retained a type of spiritual residue. If they weren't properly disposed of, they could be used by the evil forces. I mean, that sounds crazy, but it's not that far off from some of the ancient Jewish concerns about corpse impurity found in the Torah, or even the Catholic practice of relic veneration. Not to mention the hair and the nail curses found in Haitian voodoo and even Babylonian necromancy. Somehow we've all come to believe that something of the soul can linger in the body's forgotten remnants. The Viking fear was that the untrimmed, unburned nails of the dead were not just waste, discarded. They were construction materials. If too many people died without care, the ship would be complete. And when that ship sailed, the world would drown in fire and blood. There's something disturbingly mechanical about that idea, as if the apocalypse isn't triggered by the gods or the sins of the mankind, but by neglect, by entropy. The unattended dead build the ship that carries our destruction. And here's where it gets even more chilling. The Norse didn't just fear Naglfar. They feared those who might be building it. Witches, sorcerers, the luck workers, the wandering prophetess who spoke with the dead, summoned storms, and cast lots by moonlight. Some of them were honored, and many revered, but others of those prophetesses were often burned or buried alive. In other words, the people of the North feared necromancers, those who could pull the dead from their graves and make them speak, those who could awaken the nail ship before its time. And it might beg a question, why were these fears so common? Why are they so cross-cultural? Well, there's this line in Job, chapter 7, verses 9 and 10, that says, "As the cloud disappears and vanishes away, so he who goes down to the grave does not come up. He shall never return to his house, nor shall his place know him anymore." And yet, Saul saw Samuel, Jesus cast out Legion, the disciples thought he was a ghost walking on water. The Gospels themselves are haunted by these stories. And the Vikings weren't just poetic. They were trying to codify a spiritual threat. The Draugr, their word for the undead, weren't zombies in the modern sense. They weren't mindless corpses. They were something worse. They were aware, malicious, and sometimes able to grow in size. They carried memory, rage, supernatural strength, and they haunted burial mounds and grave sites. And often they showed signs of having been sorcerers in their life. In 1904, a burial mound was uncovered in Osberg, Norway. Inside was a ship, a literal one, laid to rest with two women, richly adorned in silks and sacrificial animals. One of them may have been a vulva, a seer, a woman of the hidden arts. No one knows what rites were spoken over that grave, but the archaeologists refused to sleep near the excavation site. And I don't blame them. What the Vikings feared most wasn't the death of the body, it was the return of something that looked like a person but wasn't. Something that had no place among the living and yet moved with intent, hostility, and hunger. Sound familiar? In the New Testament, unclean spirits are often found haunting tombs. The man possessed by Legion lived among the graves, and he cut himself, howled in the night, and broke chains. Mark 5 reads like a Draugr tale with a Galilean twist. And what does Jesus do? Well, he casts the spirits into pigs and sends them hurtling into the sea, drowned and silenced. But think about it. The pigs, they're unclean animals, become vessels for unclean spirits. And the sea is the place of exile, not destruction and not permanency. So what if Naglfar is the Norse version of that exile? A prison barge, a waiting room for spirits without form, demonic forces unbound from the flesh, collecting the detritus of the human world, the fingernails, the failures, the forgotten, waiting for a captain, waiting to sail for war. In Christian terms, we'd call that the abyss. According to Revelation 9, something rises from it. So here's the theory. Naglfar isn't just a myth, it's memory garbled through oral tradition. It's an ancient attempt to describe the invisible world, one not of gods and heroes, but of spiritual rot, of demons looking for a way back into our world. In Norse myth, the ship sets sail when Loki, of course, breaks free from his chains and leads the giants against the gods. But Loki isn't just a trickster. He's also a liar, a shapeshifter, a father of monsters. He seduces, deceives, mocks divine law. In Christian typology, that's not a trickster god, that's Satan. So ask yourself, when the nail ship finally breaks free, what does it carry, the dead or the damned? Some may say this is all imagination, that the dead don't speak or they can't speak. And if you hear something whispering in the dark, it's grief or madness or sleep paralysis. But others, those who I've talked to, they know better. It's in the sagas. The seers themselves, they walk alone. They are women, mostly, according to tradition, cloaked in a blue or in red. They bear staves, carved with serpents and bones, wearing rings and brooches and the blood of goats. They sleep in the open fields or beside the newly dead. They eat the hearts of birds and chant the names of things no man should know. These were the Volur, the Seeresses of Norse tradition. And if they're just a myth, well, someone forgot to tell the skeletons. Archaeological digs across Scandinavia have uncovered women buried with staves, bones, herbs, ritual knives. One grave in particular, found in Denmark, held a woman with henbane seeds. That's an entheogen used in necromantic rites. They found another that contained a wand, a black cloak, and a pouch of cannabis. These were not peasant burials. These women were powerful, revered, feared, and their power came from the dead. There's a practice that involves a kind of ecstatic magic. It often involves altered states, rhythmic chants, and communion with spirits. It's echoed in the biblical Ove and the Hebrew word for familiar spirit, or necromancy, literally a bottle, as if the medium were a vessel for another voice. So the most famous example, it's found in 1 Samuel chapter 28. It's about Saul. He's desperate, he feels abandoned by God, so he seeks out the witch of Endor. In disguise, under the cover of night, he asks her to summon the prophet Samuel from the grave. She does. And what comes up isn't really what Saul hoped for. Samuel's ghost, or something wearing his face, rises and rebukes the king, tells him his kingdom is finished and then he'll die tomorrow. But there's kind of like this problem. The Bible says the dead don't return, do they? That they know nothing, according to Ecclesiastes 9:5. And that necromancy is an abomination. So what did Saul see? Personally, I believe it was really Samuel. But others believe it was a demon impersonating the prophet, a spirit of deceit, using Saul's desperation like a bait on a hook. But let's shift back to the Viking world, to the Draugr, to the Restless dead. They weren't mere zombies. They were spirits, sometimes with bodies, sometimes not, that lingered after death, driven by unfinished business, hatred, or sorcery. They guarded treasure, they strangled the living, they infected dreams, and they were often raised, or at least drawn, by a vulva. In one Viking saga, a shepherd sees the dead walking. First one, then many. They fill the house. They stink of rot and their eyes glow. A witch is called. She performs a rite, and one by one the dead fall and do not rise again. I mean, that sounds like folklore, but it reads like an exorcism. In another saga, a warrior dreams of a beautiful woman. First offering wisdom, then violence. His death follows. The dream woman was never explained. So the spirit, a demon, an echo of some kind of necromancer's spell? I don't know. The Norse didn't have categories like ghost and demon. They had Hugur, the soul image that could leave the body, and Filja, a spiritual follower, often animal-shaped that appeared in dreams and visions. These could be summoned, traded, even stolen. And if a person died badly or violently or suddenly without a burial, they could be claimed by something else, made into a tool, and therefore dangerous. It's kind of the same idea behind possession. We've got Jesus, who encountered the possessed in graveyards, and they're all, other places of spiritual tension. He speaks and the spirits shriek. They name themselves, they bargain, they cry out not to be sent into the abyss. Why? Well, it seems like demons need form. They need a host, a voice, a body, a fingernail. The Norse understood this. They didn't fear death itself. They feared the manipulation of death, the animation of what should rest. That's necromancy, not just speaking with the dead, but channeling them, wearing them like gloves. In the saga of the Younglings, Odin learns Sjor from a goddess Freya. Odin the Allfather, the god of battle and knowledge, learns death magic from the Vanir. He hangs himself on Yggdrasil to gain wisdom from the dead and sacrifices his eye. And then whispers into the mouths of corpses. He's not a god of light. He's the god of the threshold. Yeah, the kind of god who walks in both worlds, who opens doors. In another age, maybe a different language, we could call him a watcher. That would be First Enoch, where the Watchers descend to Earth and teach forbidden arts, enchantments, root cutting, makeup, astrology. They take wives, they beget giants. And when judgment comes, they're cast into Tartarus. They're bound in chains, and their children become the unclean spirits that haunt the earth. So imagine this. Odin, the seeker of forbidden knowledge who sacrifices to himself and speaks to the dead. What if he isn't mythic? What if he's a cultural memory of those fallen ones? What if necromancy in all its forms, from Endor to Uppsala to modern seances, isn't about talking to grandma? What if it's about contacting those spirits, those watchers who still hunger for flesh, for worship, for form? You can change the language, you can call it Cedar, you can call it Obe, spiritism, mediumship. The mechanics are always the same. A ritual, an altered state, an invitation, and a voice. Sometimes the voice soothes, sometimes it screams. But it always costs something. Back in the Viking world, the cost was usually blood. The seers would spill it before chanting, usually animals, sometimes humans, and in return the spirits gave secrets. But they also gave madness, fear, disease, the symptoms described in the biblical accounts from demonic torment. Modern necromancers talk about the veil thinning, about portal opening. They say the dead come back with messages, with warmth, with presence. But so do mimics. If an ancient Norse woman could summon a spirit that knew your secrets, looked like your father, and spoke in riddles, you might believe her. But should you? Because the truth is, something may answer your call, and that means it's not what you wanted. There's a reason we bury the dead, and it's not just hygiene. It's not just tradition. It's actually spiritual. And across cultures, across centuries, the graves we dig aren't just holes, they're boundaries. In ancient Israel, to touch a corpse was to become unclean, not symbolically, but spiritually. The law of Moses doesn't mince words. The dead pollute. Numbers 19 lays out the remedy in detail: ashes of a red heifer, running water, a priest, and a 7-day ritual cleansing. There's no shortcuts, no exceptions. That's not the language of ceremony. That's the language of containment. The Hebrews understood something we might have forgotten, that the dead leave more than memory behind. They leave spiritual residue. It's the kind of residue that attracts things, like blood in the water for sharks. The Vikings had no male priesthood, no Torah. But they found the same chill. To die badly was to die unclean, not in a moral sense, but a metaphysical one. A man slain in rage, drowned without rites, or buried without coin or blade was vulnerable. His soul stuff could linger. Worse, it could be stolen. The Draugr, again, is the key. These weren't aimless haunts. They were spiritually corrupted dead, men who had been warriors, chieftains, or seers, and their souls are now restless. They possessed their own corpses, or perhaps something else did. And you'll find stories of men buried without care who later knocked on doors. They rode midnight horses, even infected livestock. The cure? A stake through the heart? Decapitation? A second burial with the rites? The same practice shows up in Romania, in Ireland, Western China, a global fear of the misburied. And here's the chilling part. Sometimes all it took was a missing nail or a whispered curse or the wrong direction of the burial mound. And in Viking tradition, graves weren't dug at random. The body was placed with its head facing a specific direction, often east. Tools, weapons, coins, sometimes even boats were added, not just for honor, but function. These were spiritual provisions, insurance policies. If the soul got lost, these things could help find its way. If something else came for it, these things might keep it safe, or so they hoped. The Christian tradition doesn't escape this logic either. We bury facing east, awaiting the resurrection. We mark graves with stone crosses. We pray at the site, we consecrate the ground, not just to comfort the living, but to protect the dead. Why? Well, because if the dead aren't protected, they can be used. This is the unspoken horror behind both paganism and biblical burial rites. It's not just what might rise from the grave, but what might, crawl in. The Old Testament forbids necromancy, ancestor worship, and the consultation of mediums. Specifically Leviticus 20, verse 6. I will set my face against anyone who turns to mediums and spiritists to prostitute themselves by following them. Deuteronomy 18:11 calls such practices detestable, not because they're fake, but because they work. And when they work, they invite something else into the room. Vikings feared the same thing, but they didn't have a canon to warn them. They relied on sagas, and the sagas are full of the dead returning because something was wrong in their burial. A warrior who wasn't given a blade, a child whose name was never spoken again, a woman killed in childbirth and buried without honor. These become the again walkers, the Aptroganir. And what animated them wasn't the soul. Sometimes it was a spirit, a curse. And the Lex Dialog in In Lexdala Saga, a prophetess dies and is buried in a mound. Years later, a shepherd sleeps too close to it. He wakes up screaming, and he's blind. Others with him soon fall ill. The people dig up her grave, rebury her deeper, offer prayers. The sickness ends. Vision returns. It's not just folklore. It's an ancient theology of borders, of boundaries. The dead must stay put, not because we don't love them, but because we know what they might become if they don't. And yet in every generation, someone breaks the rule. They dig up the past. They desecrate graves. They summon. And they speak to what should remain silent. And in return, they get answers. Usually not the ones they want. You can hear it in some of the modern stories. People who bring home an artifact from a dig site, only to hear voices at night. Children who see someone standing at the feet of their bed after walking through a battlefield. Paranormal investigators who open a tomb and never sleep soundly again. I mean, maybe it's the imagination, I don't know. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it's some kind of spiritual mechanics of burial that are actually real. They're true and honest. And maybe when we bury the dead with honor, we're not appeasing the soul, we are guarding it, sealing it. Marking it as, this corpse is not available. It's a kind of spiritual quarantine, if you will. And in that Viking world, oddly enough, cremation was viewed as the safest route. The fire cleansed, the fire released, the fire ensured that whatever power remained in bone or blood would not be used against the living. Within Christian tradition, fire is judgment. It's final, it's permanent. Ashes to ashes, after all. But the tomb of Christ was not left sealed. He was buried, yes, but he rose. Not as a Draugr, not as a ghost, not as a mimic, but glorified. That's the contrast. The Norse believed the dead could rise twisted, vengeful, monstrous. Christ rose whole, wounds still visible, voice still his own. He didn't come back because something called him. He came back because death couldn't hold him. And that makes all the difference. Every religion has an end, a final chapter, a cosmic curtain call when the gods show their teeth and the world burns. For the Christian, it's the book of Revelation, filled with trumpets, bowls, beasts, fire, and a king riding on a white horse. And for the Vikings, it's Ragnarok. And the similarities, they're not superficial. In Ragnarok, the sky cracks open, stars fall, the earth shakes, monsters rise, dead men march, fire consumes the world. And when it's over, a new one emerges. Clean, cleansed, pure. It's almost biblical, but not quite. Because there's no victory, there's no salvation, it's just a time loop. And the gods, they die. So let's walk through it. Ragnarok begins with 3 endless winters. They're cold, they're brutal, brother killing brother, and then the sun and the moon are swallowed by a couple of wolves. Earthquakes break out, and they shatter the chains that bind the great beast. Fenrir, the wolf, Jormungir, the serpent, and Hel, the goddess of the dead. They march along with the Jotun, the frost giants, and the legions of the dishonored dead, sailing aboard Naglfar, the ship of nails. And leading them is Loki, the trickster, the shapeshifter, the liar. You might be tempted to compare Loki to Judas, the betrayer, or maybe Prometheus, the rebel. But once again, he's more like the adversary. Loki isn't evil in the way we understand it. He opposes order, opposes justice. He laughs in the face of sacred things. He's the fathers of monsters, right? His children, Fenrir, Jormungir, and Hel, all chaos incarnate. Fenrir is the beast that kills Odin. He swallows him whole. Jormungir is the world serpent, rises from the ocean, poisons the sky. Thor kills him, but dies after 9 steps from the venom. And Hel remains in the underworld, ruling over the dishonored dead, those who died of sickness, cowardice, or old age. Her hall is called the Misty Sorrow. Her dish is hunger, and her knife is famine. Reading the sagas, she sounds almost like an afterthought, but she's death without glory, and the parallels start to merge. If you give an honest look at the book of Revelation, it describes beasts, one from the sea, one from the land, and a dragon cast from heaven. A false prophet, an abyss opened, releasing smoke and locusts with the faces of men. There's a harlot riding on a many-headed beast, fire from heaven, and the blood is rising to the horses' bridles. That's chaos, that's judgment, that's terror. And then the rider, he comes with fire in his eyes, a sword from his mouth, and a name no one knows. He defeats the dragon, chains the beast, casts the deceiver into the lake of fire, and raises the dead. But this is an interesting resurrection. Some are raised to glory and some to shame. And if we compare that to Ragnarok, the dead rise, but they're not judged. They rise to fight. The dishonored dead are foot soldiers for the apocalypse. They side with the giants, with Loki. But why? Because the Norse has no concept of hell as punishment. Hell was simply where you went if you didn't die in battle. No sin required, no guilt, just quiet. Forgotten. But what if hell, like Hades, became something else, something hungry? What if it took the dishonored dead and they could use them? Well, we've seen that before in Revelation. The beast from the abyss is given a mouth that speaks blasphemies. The dragon gives him his power, and all who dwell on earth worship him. Well, they're not there to resist him. They're not to mourn him. They just follow. Because in the end, everyone serves something. And in the Viking mythos, those who die poorly serve Loki. The unsettling question, did the Norse intuit something true? Did they catch a distorted glimpse of the real end? J.R.R. Tolkien thought so. A devout Catholic. J.R.R. Tolkien thought so. He's a devout Catholic and a Norse scholar. He once said that pagan myths are not lies, but fragments of truth, splinters from a broken mirror that once reflected God. So maybe Ragnarok is twisted memory, a cultural trauma, echoing the true apocalypse. Fenrir, the monstrous wolf unbound and devouring the world, may be a shadow of the beast from Revelation. Jormungandr, the world serpent who poisons the sea and the sky, could be the Leviathan or the dragon in Revelation 12. Hell, the ruler of the dead, cold and silent, she bears resemblance to Hades or even the grave itself, which Christ must conquer. And Loki, the father of lies, the one cast out by the gods, the one who leads the final rebellion. I mean, that role doesn't require any translation. Now this is where it gets stranger. Ragnarok doesn't just end in destruction, it ends in renewal. Sure, the gods die. Some are reborn. Baldur, the bright god slain too early, returns from hell. The world is made new. It's green, peaceful, fertile. It's got two new humans, Lif and Lifrastrer, who survive by hiding in a forest and emerge into the new dawn. I mean, does that sound familiar? It should, because the Bible ends with a new heaven and a new earth, a garden, a tree of life, a bride, and a city. God dwelling with man again. But there's some kind of difference. The Bible, God wins, evil is judged, and the king returns. And there's no more death. In Ragnarok, the cycle just starts over again. Gods live, gods die, the serpent coils again beneath the sea. It's like the whole plan isn't defeated, it's just reset. It feels like a false hope, like a cosmic loop. A promise without justice. And that's what makes it dangerous, because in our world, echoes like that matter. The myths we believe shape the rituals we perform. The rituals we perform shape the doors we open. And the doors we open let things through. So, when Naglfar sails again, whether as a symbol or spiritual weapon, what side will it be on? And who's waiting to climb aboard? If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The creaking of black wood over dark water, sails stitched from skin, ropes made of hair. No wind stirs it. It moves on memory, on hunger, on the unfinished sentences of the dead. Naglfar is coming. But not in the way the old poets thought. Maybe it's not a literal ship, but a spiritual construct, an accumulation of what humanity has left untended, unrepented, unburied. A vessel made of everything we didn't let die. Rage, trauma, sorcery, idolatry. Every false name we give to things we don't understand. And the thing is, the ship doesn't build itself. We do. Every time we invoke the past without discernment, every time we glamorize the gods of chaos and blood, every time we sacrifice truth for power, or invite spirits to soothe our wounds without asking who answers, every time we treat darkness like a game, another nail goes in. And when it finally sets sail, it won't just bring a flood of monsters from some mythic underworld. It'll bring the spiritual consequences of every unexamined rite, every ancestor we call without covering, every blood-soaked symbol we hang above our children's bed because it looks cool. The Vikings feared the ship because they feared the dead weren't done, that something might use their memory, their bones, to walk the world again, that uncut nails might become the nails of war. And they were right to be afraid, because the dead aren't done. Not until they're redeemed or destroyed. In Revelation, the rider on the white horse returns not to barter with chaos, but to end it. He wears many crowns, his robe is dipped in blood, not in sacrifice, but of victory. He is called faithful and true. He's not Odin. He doesn't hang himself on the tree to gain knowledge. He hangs on the cross to give life. He doesn't build a ship, he calms the sea. He calls to the dead not to raise an army of shadows, but to resurrect the saints. That's the choice. We don't have to fear the nail ship, but you do have to recognize when it's being built, because myths matter, symbols matter, spirits answer. And some doors, once they're open, don't close quietly. So if you see black sails on the horizon, ask yourself, is this a memory? Is this a dream? Or is it a warning? And who's steering the wheel? Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.